Welcome to another episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. This is a podcast brought to you from Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. I'm Tara Woodlee, President and CEO of the nonprofit, and we're going to share topics with you today that are important to survivors to hopefully bring awareness and a sense of community over the topics that we present. And today, I'm happy to have a wonderful guest. Her name is Bridey Thelen-Heidel. And as a teacher, TEDx speaker, and fierce LGBT plus youth advocate, who's been named the Best of Tahoe teacher and celebrated by the California Teachers Association. Her best-selling memoir, Bright Eyes, A Life with Abuse of a Narcissistic Mother, earned runner-up from both the San Francisco Writers Festival and the New York City Big Book Awards, and has led to partnerships with domestic violence organizations and social service agencies working to better understand domestic violence from a child's perspective. So we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. So that children are often victims and they witness domestic violence. I know, like everybody who listens here knows that I'm a survivor of domestic violence and that my children were a lot of times in there. And I don't think I've talked too much about the roles they played in trying to protect me as a mother and taking on that role and the effects of what happened to them. And I think it's real important that we have that conversation. So can you share with us some of like your early experiences with that and let our audience get to know your story a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm so grateful to be here and to talk about this. And I feel like, when I was growing up with a mom who was an alcoholic and an addict and addicted to dangerous men, mostly.
Oh, yeah.
And so my early years, probably from about 7 on, became really the most difficult in terms of being confused about who she brought into our house. So my role was to protect her. Like you said, I was her shield sometimes. Sometimes I was her weapon. Sometimes I was her caretaker. And sometimes I was her confessor. And, I was 8 and 9 years old and I'm cleaning up after my mom. So I'm cleaning up the blood. I'm cleaning up broken glass. I'm holding her and nurturing her and telling her it's going to be okay. And then she would bring the man back and she would let him back into our house. And I think as a little kid, that's really confusing and it's scary. And I think there's also a level of humiliation, because I was embarrassed, really. I think that not only that she would do this, but that she would kind of put me in this place to badmouth him, and to say all these things. And then she would bring him back. And I was supposed to look at him in the eyes and then live with him. So growing up, we moved a lot, as I'm sure a lot of people watching this can relate. When you are in a home with an addict, there's not a lot of stability. And so I changed schools about every 6 months, ended up going to 22 schools before I graduated from high school. And we moved up and down the West Coast. And our moves were really decided by her boyfriends. We were either moving one in or running away from one.
Right.
And our home life was just absolute chaos. And I think there's just, I think part of talking about what happens to the kids is important because I can't really speak to my mom's need to be hurt, and after writing, a book about the whole kind of life with her, I did realize that she had this need to be loved in a very dangerous way.
Mhm.
And I didn't. I was a little kid
Right.
and I just wanted my mom, you know? And unfortunately, my mom became an abuser as I was growing up, you know, but prior to that, I worshiped her, you know, I loved her. And I was her best friend. And she was the only person I had. So I was willing to do anything for her. And I think, you know, that's something that is pretty hard on a little kid. It's pretty hard on a little kid when a lot of that responsibility is put on you and you do your best to protect him and it doesn't work, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
interesting you were saying that because I was talking just with my husband this morning before this podcast about the dynamics between me and my mother because we suffered generational abuse in my family.
Mhm. Yeah.
And myself, I did not see physical abuse with my mother, but my mother was the one who was verbally abusive a lot.
Hmm.
And she jumped from husband to husband, being married 4 times. And I'm the oldest. And the dynamics of, I was explaining to my husband of being her caretaker, being the one who had to listen to her and balance her checkbook for her at 11
Right.
years old because she, not that she couldn't do it, my goodness, she does taxes and numbers for a living, but because she was too emotionally spent to deal with those finances.
Right.
And the multiple jobs that I took to help support the family
Hmm.
and support what was going on, which was toxic at the time, when I just wanted to be a kid. At
Hmm.
11 years old, I shouldn't have had to pay the bills and work a paper route and mow 6 lawns and babysit all these kids and hand every dime over to my mother to help support the family
Right.
and then help with siblings. And my mother
Hmm.
was pregnant at the same time. So the responsibility I think sometimes we put on our children can be so weighty that we don't even realize the effects of what's going on in there in our head. I wanted to love and adore my mother, but at the same
Hmm.
time, I hated her for what she was
Right.
putting me through. So
Right.
I hear some similarities like in the emotions that you were experiencing through your childhood on that level. So tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, as a kid, as far as like your relationship with your mom, because you're bouncing a lot back and forth, right?
Right. Yeah.
And and so how was that affecting you, like maybe even like in school or with your
Right.
friendships and things like that?
Well, I think when you're a kid doing all that, and you sounded a lot like I was, you know, just working and helping and doing all these things and becoming quite parentified.
Hmm.
Right. That's a word we know. And I used to hate being told how mature I was. I'm like, I don't want to be mature. I just want to be 10. I just want to be a kid. You know, I
Yes.
really, really took that more as an insult than the compliment that a lot of the adults thought it was. And, you know, I would sometimes look at my mom like, do you want to tell them why I'm so mature? You know, do you want to explain to them why I'm too grown up? Um, but I think, you know, she was so consumed with her own survival that
Hmm.
she had no awareness of what I was going through. She had zero understanding or cared, I think, because she was
Hmm.
just, you know, but I think it was challenging. I mean, I was thinking this morning, you know, that her abusers isolated her, right?
Right.
So they moved us. We moved to very remote locations. We moved away from family, but then she also isolated me. And
Right.
I think that's also something to be aware of with kids. We isolate kids because we don't want them to tell our secrets. We don't want them to have family to go to. I couldn't have friends over, really, you know, and when I did have friends over, sometimes it was a pretty dramatic exit. They would climb out my window because my mom and her boyfriend would start fighting. You know, they would leave in the middle of the night or call their parents early in the morning. It was just humiliating. But again, she wasn't aware of any of that because she was so consumed in her own her own chaos, right? Her own whatever she was going through. So I
Mhm.
think just from the kids' perspective, you know, our whole world is them,
Right.
but we are not their whole world. And that is where I think there's a lot of confusion. And I feel like talking about this now and getting more involved with social services agencies and just trying to remind people that when a woman or a man, you know, when somebody is brave enough to come through the doors of a shelter, I'm blown away by that because my mom never did. And I feel like had she sought out resources like yours or others, I probably wouldn't have a memoir to write. And I would
Right.
be okay with that, you know. But I do feel like if and when she walks through the door and she has kids, there is a lot of messaging that can happen, I think, with the kids. There's a lot of help that can, you know, maybe strategies we can use. And I teach high school also. So I've been teaching
Mhm.
for 25 years. And I can also kind of recognize kids in my class who are going through similar situations. And I feel like I've been practicing that messaging during my career too, and trying to just tell kids who I have a sense are in a rough home that
Mhm.
this is not your story. This is your parents' story. You know,
Right.
you can rewrite the story you've been written into. And there's a timing, right? You're going to graduate in a few years. And what's the choice you're going to make? And and who are you going to let love you? And who are you going to fall in love with? And what's that going to look like? And so I think in terms of just being a kid, I'm starting to open up to what I needed as a kid and probably what you needed as a kid. You know, you
Mhm.
needed to be a kid and you needed to not feel the responsibility and the weight of your mom's decisions, you know?
Right. No, absolutely. And um, I have that unique perspective too of actually then being in an abusive relationship too. And one of the big things for me was it because of what happened with my mother, it set me up for the constant feeling of I deserved what I was getting from my ex. And but I sheltered the kids as much as I could from it. But of course, it spills over to the kids. They're going to see it. They're going to hear it. They're going to be in the middle of it. And I think one of the best things I did was actually listening to my children when we finally did separate and he wanted to come back into the home. Because my 10-year-old immediately was like, he came over crying, wanting back in. And she was immediately like, Mom, don't you let him back in this house. And it was like a smack in my face of, wow, this has a, I did not shelter them as much as I thought I had from
Right,
any of this.
right,
It was too much. And
right.
it me take more of a stand uh, than I think I would have been capable of if she wouldn't have voiced that opinion.
Yeah. Well,
And
how lucky and how amazing that you listened. Um,
yes.
I mean, you're an exceptional mom for listening because, you know, my mom didn't listen. I asked many times, she didn't listen, you know. But I think that's
I
an interesting,
understand that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting perspective though, if, you know, you thought you were sheltering your kids because I do feel like kids who grow up in these environments, we're on heightened alert all the time, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
your cortisol is pumping all the time. Your adrenaline is ready. I never slept well.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
always ready, right? You're always ready to wake up in the middle of the night. And so I feel like we are so tuned into our moms that there's no sheltering possible, right? Like, I mean, I heard every noise, I heard every inflection in the voice. I could tell when their breathing shifted and a fight was going to start, right? You could tell when the silence was just happening too long and you got ready, right? You physically got ready. I would kind of look around my room. I would look for the phone. I would, you know, there's a preparation involved. So I just don't
Mm-hmm.
even know if you can shelter a kid from it. I think that
Mm-hmm.
we are, yeah, I feel like little kids were just conditioned. We're conditioned to pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to everything. And I'm sure, like you being in Texas, you guys are well aware when the air pressure changes and you
Oh,
know,
yes.
You know when the wind is coming, and I feel like that happens in the house too. You
Mhm.
know, and if it's been 2 or 3 days that there hasn't been a fight, it's coming, right?
Right.
So
Mm.
I don't think it was possible for my mom to shelter me. And she certainly didn't try that much. A closed door is not going to work.
Mm-mm.
Right? You just put your,
No, it
I
doesn't.
mean, you can't.
Sending them to the park. That I used to do that. Go to the park, go because
Right,
it was across the street from our house, or go over
right.
to the friend's house or do something, and it was not. It did not help. And
No,
I think
no,
it's part of just the conditioning I have of being like like I said, from my own, when things would go bad with my mom, I was sheltering the siblings.
right.
So I was just naturally taking on that role when I came into motherhood as well.
Yeah,
And the burden it put, because like when I did finally divorce and started dating, the youngest expressed herself. I didn't realize how much the oldest carried until I started dating, and then all of a sudden she was trying to mother me. Yeah, she's like, "What time you gonna be back? Where are you going?
right.
When are you leaving? If you're leaving there, you have to tell me where you're going next." She was so hyper fixated on where I was at all times. And if I
Right.
was safe, kids should have to feel that way.
No, it's so,
It's,
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think too that, that sibling dynamic, I had little sisters. One in particular who I dedicated the memoir to because I really took care of her a lot in her, first 5 years. And that dynamic becomes weird too, right? Because I thought I was her mom and she called me mom.
mhm.
And so as we got older, she in her 20s would get so upset with me because I would mother her and she's like, "Stop being my mom. You're my sister." And I'm like, "I don't know what that means. I have no
Yes.
idea how to be a sister." And I've had to explain that to some of my other siblings. Like, I don't really know how to be a sister. I'm not quite sure what this is because I've never done that. And so
Mhm.
I've practiced, I practice, but I think that sets you up too with your siblings for a very strange dynamic that can be unhealthy in some ways.
Mhm.
And so there's also, when talking about like the kid, there's recovery from that as well. And there's not only a dynamic with the parent that you have to sort out and figure out where you're at, but there's also this dynamic with the siblings because the oldest sibling, right, a lot falls on us. Everything falls on
Yes.
us. And then you kind of look down the line to see how everybody reacts to it. And I don't have any contact with my two youngest sisters, but the one I took care of, we talk almost every day. So I feel really fortunate for that. I do know how to be a sister now, but I'm also 53. It's taken a long time.
I understand completely because I'm
Yeah.
55 and I had to
Yeah.
relearn that dynamic too of being a
Yeah.
sibling, because it's a fundamental shift. It really is in the
Yeah.
household from uh, you when you have the instability going on essentially in ours. She becomes the provider, mom became the provider, the breadwinner, the taking on the role of what traditionally is a father, because there is no father. Fathers are coming and going, people are coming and going out of the house. So the fundamental shift is usually the oldest child becomes that other parent, that other
Right.
parental figure. And it really changes the dynamics within the family and creates issues that can last a lifetime, because like you said, it was hard, and it still is at times, to let go of certain things that you think your siblings should be doing when, my goodness, you're so much. I have six. So my youngest sibling is actually the same age as my children. My mother and I were pregnant at the same time, which is really weird. And the experience. So being a sibling to someone who is the same age as your own children is a whole crazy dynamic. And all the children run the gamut of, I'm 11 years older than one, 15 years older than another. So you want to just parent them. And once they become adults, they're like, hey, hello, you're not my parent. You
Yeah.
got to stop.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Right. Well, and I hope too, and I would imagine this happens in agencies. Again, I don't have an experience as a kid going into an agency and asking for help, but there's that opportunity when the kids walk through the door to really let them be kids, right? And to give them opportunity to relax and breathe and play and remember and be reminded that they're 8 or 9 or 10. And I do hope there's that opportunity for kids when they kind of walk through that door. I wonder. That's a wondering I have.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate in the fact that I had grandparents that allowed me to be that. So they would come and get me whenever they had an opportunity, and I was allowed to be that kid in their
Yeah.
presence with them.
Yeah.
But a lot of children don't have that. So, shifting the dynamic a little bit. So, you were talking earlier about seeing some of the signs of some of your students who come in.
Yeah.
What kind,
Yeah.
can we talk about that just a little bit? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
signs, like maybe for other teachers who might be watching or listening? Like,
Right.
what kind of things do you usually see that kind of picks where you can pick that student out who's having those kinds of issues that might be watched for?
Well, I think part of what happens in my classroom is I do share a little bit about my kind of the first day of school,
Mm-hmm.
saying I went because I teach at the high school that I graduated from. So I changed high schools 5 times, but I teach it at the one I went to in my senior year. And so I will just kind of open with the conversation and say, yeah, I went to 5 high schools and I moved around a lot. We had kind of a chaotic life. So I open the first day with that so that I can kind of create a safe space in some sense for kids who might go, oh yeah, I lived in a motel too. Or, they might not say that publicly, but they might tell me later.
Right.
So there is a little bit of opening the year with that part of my story because I feel like that kind of lays the groundwork. And then if a kid comes in and says, oh, things are going a little, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, I tend to ask questions. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really, there's a little balance with the teacher because we are mandated reporters. And
Right.
so there's always this fine line that you got to be careful what you ask too,
Mm-hmm.
because, but I feel like, there are kids that come in and they're exhausted. They are just exhausted. They can't keep their head up. And I remember being
Mm-hmm.
that kid. And so I might ask, did you get sleep last night? And I'll ask light, were you playing video games all night? What was going on? And well, it was just a little rough at my house. And, or they come in and it's clear that they haven't really brushed their hair. They're wearing what they were wearing the day before. Um, I also, though, for myself, I presented very well when I was a kid. Like you would have never known that I had anything crazy going on at my house, right? I would have died before I let you know there was something happening. And I would have never talked to a teacher. So I also look for that. I look for kids who present really well and get thrown off if they get an A- and they freak out and they panic. They get
Yeah.
nervous that their parents are looking at their grades. And I think there's being concerned that your parent is looking at your grade, and then there's being terrified that your parent is seeing there's a missing assignment or something. Because I also know for myself, I had to do really well in school because if I didn't, it was a red flag that would draw attention to my mom. And
Right.
so she made sure that I got really good grades. That was mandatory. I never had time to do homework, right? I'm sure you
Yeah.
too. Like you could never sit down. You could never. So my homework was done kind of under my blankets at night with a flashlight or early in the morning
Yes.
or right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I had to be a perfect student because if I wasn't, the teachers would call or they'd want to have a conference. So I also recognize that kid too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I pay attention. I definitely pay attention. I notice when a kid gets a haircut. I notice when a kid is just beyond stressed in But again, I think it's like we were saying earlier, I have a heightened sense of, I'm just sensitive to everything in my classroom, and I'm sensitive to kids' energy, and and I don't assume everybody is having a rough time of it, and I don't assume every family is dysfunctional, but
Right.
I'm also open and aware and willing to have that conversation with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important because a lot of times uh, teachers, I know there were teachers, I did the same thing. I hid it from them. I didn't want to have to talk to a teacher or explain it to a teacher. And um, because you're the same generation, I ended up uh, at 15, I got the benefit of being able to go live with my grandparents, but it was
Mhm.
from an incident with my mom because I did tell some people what was going on
Mhm.
at the house at the time.
Mhm.
And she cut loose and she left marks on my legs. And a teacher in gym class asked me about those.
Wow.
And when I told her and opened up to her about it, she took me to the counselor's office, and the counselor was like, well, we're going to have to call in authorities and things. And I just sobbed, begged them, don't do that. Call my grandparents.
Mhm.
Well, the counselor did call my grandfather, and he came right up there, and he was uh, he was my savior at that point because I was terrified of all the things that mom had said. They'll come take you. They'll come,
Right. Right.
if you say anything, you're going to tear our family apart. And
Right.
I had born baby sister at home and a little 2-year-old
Wow.
baby brother that I was his mom, and
Right.
the two other sisters. And I remember I just felt like my world was falling apart. And my grandfather literally, I don't know how he did it, but he convinced the school authorities that he called his lawyer in front of them and convinced them to let him handle it. And my grandfather and grandmother stepped in and said, Cheryl, she's coming to live with us
Wow.
because the
And that's,
contention.
yeah. Yeah.
And I went to live with them. And
Yeah.
so, but it left another scar in our family because my other siblings were like, why didn't you take us too?
Yeah.
Because,
100%.
yeah,
I was
so
going to say it's like a survivor's guilt,
yeah,
yeah, survivor's guilt. And I think that's what keeps us around. Like you said, I mean, I remember having that same threat where she'd say, they're going to come and take you away. And, of course, as an adult, I'm like, why didn't I just say, okay, great, that's what I need, but instead I stayed. And I think, like you said, by the time I was willing to leave, I had siblings, I had little sisters. And so where I would have left her, I couldn't leave them. And
yes,
that is, in my book, I call it was the bait, like
mm-hmm.
that was the bait. And she figured out, oh, she's not going to leave because of these girls. And that was even
Right,
through college. I would kind of come back and I would visit and I would bring Christmas presents. And I just stayed connected when I could have just been gone. But
right,
it's that, again, like you said, it's when you blur those lines between these are my sisters, these are not my children, but yet that's how you feel, and I can share that survivor's guilt. And I think a lot of people have that feeling because we're not allowed to put ourselves first when you grow up in those environments. And I remember uh, um, just trying to figure out how to have emotions that weren't my mom's, right? Like, I'm sure
right,
you can relate, right? So we were talking in my story, I talk about meeting the band Duran Duran, the 80s band. And
oh
I
yes, I
was,
loved them.
yes, yes. And I was so obsessed with them. And, for years, people were like, why do you love this band so much? And I finally, through my writing, figured out that what they gave me was something I desperately needed at 12. They gave me an understanding of my own emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So, right, my emotions were dictated by my mom. If she was happy, I could be happy. If she was sad, I was sad. If she was angry at the man, I got to be angry at the man, but I couldn't be angry at him any other time, right? I could only be angry during her little window when she was upset. But
Right.
I found this band and they taught me all kinds of emotions. I could, shut my door and crank up the music and I could be happy and joyful. I could be pensive. I could be angst. I could be all these things that I didn't even know. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
they also let me be 12. I got to just be a spastic 12-year-old Durrani who was ridiculous and feeling my age. So, but
Yes.
yes, I mean, but all those things, again, I feel like when you grow up in that environment and you are so attached to your parent and you're so attached to your siblings. And I do think reminding kids of their own emotions, what do you feel? Not what does she feel, but what do you feel right now? That's pretty huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty huge. That's also
Mm-hmm.
stuff
Yeah.
I think I do that with my students too. Is just trying to help them separate themselves a little bit from, because they're in high school. So it's like, well, what do you believe? What do you feel? Do you know yet? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the whole shadow of what's happening in the family so overwhelms the whole
Right.
dynamic of what everybody feels. It's like a cosmic little bubble. And it's a
Isn't it?
non-reality, but it is your reality at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and and I'm sure you went through this as well, but you have that added detachment from your emotions, right? I realized in my 30s that I had dissociative disorder as a kid,
mhm,
which we all do, I'm sure. When you're growing up in those environments, you leave yourself to some extent, right? You numb yourself, you detach from what's going on. And in my case, I used to fly. And so I would literally leave my body and I could watch what was going on and I could make a plan and I could not feel scared for a minute. And then I could come back to myself and I could face as I call them in my book, the monster, right? I could face the monster and I
mhm.
could be brave. But when you're detaching from your feelings that often, which I'm sure you were too, there's a point at which you have to reattach to those emotions. And when does that happen? At what age does
Right.
that happen, right? And
Hmm.
what partner do you have that you get to do that with? So in your case, whoever it was that you fell in love with and became your abuser, it's like, when do you come back to these emotions that are actually yours?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, how do you think that affected your relationships?
It took a while, I mean, I met my husband. I've been married now almost 30 years, and we met when I was just 23. And but I s- I selected him pretty carefully. I mean, even though I was young, right? I'd been dating, but he was just a really gentle person. And I had always known when I was growing up, just if I did everything opposite from my mom, I would be okay. Like if I
Right.
literally made every single choice opposite from her, I was going to be all right. And so when I met him and he was so gentle and he was so kind, and she met him and she told me that he was boring. And I was like, great, I'm going to marry him.
Yeah.
Like the
That's
fact that,
wonderful.
yeah, she was like, he's so boring. I'm like, perfect. I will be marrying that person. But I think it was a lot. It took a lot of trust. It took a lot of patience on his part for me to work through all my trauma triggers and heal a lot of things that, he at one point picked up, drank a Budweiser, and who knew that was going to trigger me, but that was the beer in our house. And I flipped out, and said, no Budweiser in our house. And I think luckily, again, he comes from a very healthy home, and he was able to kind of shoulder my stuff for a long time. But
Hmm.
you know, and then of course having a child, that's a whole nother set of triggers, right? And I'm sure you
Yes.
experienced that, because at every age, she's 5 and I'm thinking about what was happening to me at 5. She's 7 and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, is that what 7 looks like? Because that's not what I feel like a 7-year-old does. So I think in terms of my relationships, it's been um, it's just been a lot of watching and reflecting and kind of some come to Jesus moments where you're like, wow, I had no
Mhm.
idea how messed up I was at 10 years old, because my 10-year-old is just playing soccer, and she can't even make her own toast. And I had 2 jobs by 10, right?
Uh-huh, me too. Yes,
Right,
absolutely. Yes.
right, right.
No, I get it because, like, well, my daughter is older. She's 35 now, but I have a granddaughter who's 10.
Uh-huh.
And I have another one that's 8. And when they're here with me and they're with me a lot, I'm thinking and going, thank God they're kids. And I'm
Right,
actually getting to enjoy a childhood again with them in conjunction with
right,
them. The things that I really didn't get to do, I try to make the time to do with them
right,
and have fun with them.
right. Oh my
And
gosh. When my
so,
daughter was born, I went into incredible amounts of debt buying her all the things I wished I had as a kid.
yes, I did that as well. And I'm doing it with the grandchildren too.
I was like, I mean, and she, as it turns out, she's 23 and she's a minimalist. So here I was like shoving all this stuff in her room. I'm like, you have to have this and you have to have that. And she, by 6 years old, is getting rid of it. But yeah, trying to make up for my childhood through her, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard not to do that because you feel like you have to compensate for something
Right.
and you're
Right.
not sure what that something is.
Right.
But you
Right.
want them to have everything that you didn't have. And sometimes that's not always the best thing. But in other ways, I think it's great. I mean, the grandkids get
Yeah.
to have dance classes and all these things that I couldn't provide and I didn't
Right.
get that I
Right.
wanted. And they
Right.
get to choose to do it themselves. What are
Right.
you wanting to do? Kind of,
Right.
and not what somebody chose for them.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's important because I didn't have those choices.
No.
Mine was you're going to do what I think you need to do, and
Right.
you'll like it whether you want to or not. And
Right. Right.
I never felt like I had that kind of a choice or a voice or even could look at what I wanted in life as a child.
No. No, well, too, and if you grow up in poverty, you don't have a lot of choices either, do you? Right? You're
No.
kind of, you get what you get. You get the clothes that don't fit or they're scratchy, or you get the food you don't really like or you're allergic to that you don't know you're allergic to. I think, in my classroom, I do that too. I set up situations where kids, they make choices. And it is interesting to see how many girls specifically, there's like, I don't know, I don't care. I'm like, that's also a vote. Like, you have to care. You have to, like, what
Hmm.
do you want? Because if you don't, somebody else is going to tell you. And right now it's just a group project, but what is that going to look like in 5 years when you still don't care, when you still don't have an opinion about something? So I think that's also something that, with younger kids, um, I was thinking about this too. And again, I'm sure that you grew up very similarly. I was never allowed to say no to my mom.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So that 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 element is so dangerous, especially for girls, right?
Hmm.
Especially for girls growing up, that you don't feel like you have the ability to say no. And I remember my daughter, she was probably about 6, and a friend of hers was bullying her. And I said, well, just tell her no. And she looked at me and she said, you told me I can't say no. And so I had started to repeat that cycle with my daughter, saying, like, don't you tell me no. And I realized in that moment, it was like my whole world, right? There's just this huge tunnel where I thought, wow, I've got to create opportunities for her to say no to me, because otherwise we're doing this all over again, right? And so that was one of those elements of breaking a pattern that I didn't even know existed. I wasn't even aware of it until my kids showed it to me. And I
Right.
thought, oh man, this is dangerous. I knew
Right. And
I mean, I never yelled at her. I didn't hit her. So I knew I had broken a lot of those patterns. But that one, that, man, that can be super dangerous, right?
mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, and each child is an individual. That may not have
Right.
affected another kid where they wouldn't have taken it that way,
Right.
where your other child does take it that way because they're
Right.
such individuals and how they how they internalize what dynamic is
Yeah.
going on around them is very a unique experience for each
Yeah.
individual child.
Right.
So, and that's hard to compensate, especially if you're a parent,
Right.
and understanding that this is that kind of thing you wouldn't have even fathomed would be on the
Right.
radar, right?
Right. Right. I
So,
think I think uh I was just thinking about like working with these agencies and messaging with kids and stuff, but I think there's another aspect to um things that I tell my students that I think would be really helpful for kids is, when you grow up blocking hits from your mom, whether she's hitting you or the guy's hitting her or whatever you're doing, you become incredibly brave young, right? I mean, I'm
yes,
sure you are a pretty brave kid and you don't have the same fears that other people do because real fear. And I actually I'm very careful about like my book and my TEDx talk with my students because it's vulnerable for me to share that stuff. But I had a girl
right.
the other day. I have a girl who's in my class right now, and she's in the foster system, and she's 16, and she just needed to watch my TED talk because it is about being brave and it's about the resilience that you have and it's about your optimism, all these things that are conditioned when you grow up in a dangerous environment like that as a kid. And I think that's really important messaging to tell little kids, right? To acknowledge how brave they are, because that sets them up for being brave in the world, right? And how resilient they are, which I've always found to be a very uncomfortable word to use with little kids because they're not trying to be resilient, right? They're just
Right.
they're just getting up and going to school and just doing it over and over. And um, but also how optimistic they are. And, like you had said, your mom's was always in a good mood in the morning. And that's such a pattern too, right? So all hell breaks loose the night before, then everybody wakes up in the morning and we're all in a good mood. And we're all pretending that nothing happened. We're all this like collective gaslighting, and nobody wants to bring it up because it's such a beautiful morning and mom's having coffee and everything's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a conditioning of optimism too, right? You just believe like every day is a fresh start. So there's kind of some good qualities. I think that if you're looking for anything um, that's positive to come out of this stuff, I mean, at least that's what I found is to try
Mm-hmm.
to figure out I'm not doomed to be a dysfunctional parent. I'm not doomed to be a crappy partner. I'm not doomed to be an abuser.
Right.
It's not even though the internet will tell you that the odds are pretty high, it's also not a definite, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so thinking about these things that we can share with our students or share with kids who come in like, wow, you're really brave. And they'll go, yeah, actually. And then they'll tell you the stories about why they're brave.
Yeah, kids usually just need a little crack in the door and
They
they will blow
do.
it wide open.
I
So,
know. I know. I know. They really will. They really will. And which is so important. It's so important. It's so healthy.
so I'm curious, in the end, have you been able to have any kind of healing or relationship with mom?
No,
No.
no. So when my daughter was a year old, um, I watched I watched my mom do some things at my daughter's birthday that reminded me of when I was younger. And I saw the pattern repeating itself. And not that my mom would be mean to my daughter, but she would be mean to me in front of my daughter. And I didn't want my
Um,
daughter to see that. And my husband had already put up with a lot of stuff with my mom. We'd been together at that point 6 or 7 years. And I just thought, enough is enough. She controlled the first 30 years of my life. She does not get the next 60. So
right.
yeah, so I just stopped answering the phone. It was pretty simple. I mean, I stopped answering the phone and that was the physical, right? And I'm also hours away from her. And interestingly, she stopped calling. And I actually wrote about it in the epilogue of my book that, you know, um, I did hear through the grapevine, I got called a lot of names for detaching from everyone and going no contact. I got called a lot of names, but I didn't get called back. So, she never called to say, where are you? I'm sorry. What did I do? Never. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been 22 years. And uh, I have to say I'm healed, and we
Right.
all know there's those levels of healing and forgiveness that you can really do without those people being part of it, because it isn't about her, right? It's just about me releasing all of it from my own self-worth and my own body. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we haven't spoken in 22 years, and I don't regret a second, and I don't miss her. Um, there was a grieving. There was a
Oh
grieving.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I basically had to convince myself that she was dead. And I
Mm.
did. And I did. And now, of course, with the book, I have to remember that she's still alive out there somewhere. So, and she probably has
Yeah.
read the book. But
Well, I understand. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
but I think sometimes, you just have to do those things for yourself. And that going no contact, I don't know. Um, I was looking up on social media and I saw on TikTok there were 71.5 million views of videos about going no contact with our adult parents.
mhm.
And I feel like it's a lot of people in our generation who just sucked it up, right? We moved on. We're like, oh, we're fine. I'm fine. We didn't go to therapy, right? When we were
Right.
younger. Um, and now we're like, wait a minute, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And I know that on the book tours, I've talked to people, a lot of people have disclosed to me that they're going no contact with their parents who are now in their 70s, and
Mm-hmm.
then younger people too. I mean, it's 20-year-olds. So they're figuring it out a lot earlier than I did, which is great. But I
Mm-hmm.
think I think there's a lot of myth around family. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that we have to be loyal to our nightmare, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I just,
Yes. Oh, I totally get that.
yeah.
Our dynamics in our family is just so slightly different because I did go pretty much no contact with my mom for a long time, and then we went through what we went through with my daughter when she was in her abusive relationship and him hunting her down, and then her being, murdered in the end. And at that moment, all of a sudden, my mother broke her silence about everything she endured, all the molestation and abuse and the things that, and other people in the family. It opened a flood door to where, like, the whole family started talking about. That's how we found out generations of abuse, like over 100 years of abuse. And I could see, like, where generation thought they were doing better and we
Yeah.
weren't, and look what it culminated in our
Right.
family. And in that moment, her and I found some healing because all of a sudden she was there for me in ways that she had never been before. She went to every court date with me for
Oh,
2 years, and I don't, because of that, her and I were able to find some kind of structural healing. I don't open certain doors still
yeah.
because
Right.
that can be dangerous with her. But at the same
Yeah.
time, my siblings, a lot of them have had to go non contact for their own healing.
Right.
And I allow that. And I had to
Yeah.
have a conversation with them, but don't come talk badly about mom to me because I'm at a place of where I'm at a good plateau with her.
Right. Right. Well,
And
and that's so
that's all
sweet. I
you can
mean,
have.
yeah.
So,
Well, and I think, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, had my mom made an attempt, maybe,
right.
you know, but I think it's really, isn't that's the most wonderful thing, is that if you can have that healing with your parent, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's the best thing ever, because nobody wants to go through. I miss having a mom, but then I realized I never really had a mom, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I miss the myth of the mother. I miss who I wanted her to be when I was young,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I don't know what's to come after she passes, or I don't know, but I
Mhm.
do feel like I think it's a wonderful thing. And I'm so sorry though that it happened for you in that way, like,
Yes.
right. I
It's
mean,
terrible
that's
that it had to be that level before she
right.
was able to like be open with me, like really open about what was going on
Right.
inside of her, and
Right.
for her to actually be a mother. Like I said, it the dynamic of a relationship between us was more, spousal, I would say, because of the
Right.
dynamics, just the dynamics.
Right.
But that's not what I wanted. That's not what I
Right.
needed. I needed a mother. I
Right.
needed a mother who comforted me and took care of me and told me things were going to be okay and she was going to stand beside me. And I got it in that little experience that I will be forever grateful for. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it doesn't change who she is. I know who she
Right.
is.
Right.
I know how she works, and uh just overlook that or gloss that over anymore.
Right.
I
Right.
go into it with open eyes of like, okay, this is where I cut certain things off at this level,
Right.
because we're not going to go back into the overstepping of those boundaries again.
Right.
So,
Right. And it's beautiful. I mean, that is really, I think, and I think it's also really nice that you and your siblings can all have your own journey with her, because I feel like that's what I've had to do too, is my path is not my sister's path,
mm-hmm,
with our mom. And we had different experiences, right? If I'm 11 years older, like you are, I'm 11 years older than my sister. She didn't see what I saw. She didn't
right,
carry what I carried, right? And then the younger ones, who are, one of them's 18 years younger than I am, her experience was totally different. So, I think, and it's not for me to say what they should be doing. It's just what I need to be doing. And, I hope my younger sisters read the book, because I think that it's important to me that they know I did try to stay. I did try to
mm-hmm,
help them. I did try to, um, I tried my best. And,
right.
I think, again, there's a grieving involved with all of that. And I certainly, oh my gosh, are you writing a book? You really should probably write a book.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
working on my book.
Yeah,
Yes.
good, good, good. I mean, I do
Yes.
feel like the more I talk to people about their stories, whether anybody reads your story or you show it to anybody, I think showing your story to yourself, that's the most important thing that we can do, is take all these stories that we had to keep secret and we weren't allowed to talk about, we weren't allowed to feel, we weren't allowed to forgive, we weren't allowed to kind of bring out and look at in the light. I think that's what writing my book helped me with so much. And
Right.
just writing all of those stories down, it released them. And I'm sure you're familiar with CPTSD, right? Like that,
Mm-hmm.
holding all those memories in our body, it can make us so sick. And
Oh,
letting
yeah.
all of, yeah, right. And letting all of that out. And the more I wrote them down, I wrote down the first chapter of my book, I wrote it down probably, I don't know, 80 times at least. And now it's a story, and it doesn't live in me, and it doesn't hurt when I talk about it. And I have zero emotion. I have to actually, now that I'm talking about the book, I have to remember the emotion because I am so detached from all of it. But what a freeing feeling, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And all those memories and all those people we're trying to hold accountable by remembering their cologne and their, the song that was playing, and all these things that we can release now. It's so
Right.
freeing,
Absolutely.
and it gives us at 53 and 55, it gives us more memory space to remember what we have to get at the store, right?
Yes. Because, oh my goodness, yes.
Right. I feel like it's like a disk defragment or a disk cleanup. I feel like on your computer, I'm like, oh, I just got rid of all of that. Now I can actually remember that I have to get toilet paper.
Oh, that's great. I feel you on that one.
Right. But I am glad to hear, I'm
Absolutely.
glad to hear you're working on your book, because, there's so much healing for yourself, but there's also an incredible amount of healing that comes when people read your story and they see
Well,
themselves.
that's what it's all about, breaking that silence. That's what, that's why the
Right.
organizations name that and stuff. So
Right.
if you don't open that up, for people to
Right.
hear. They don't realize that they're not isolated in
Right.
this kind of a journey.
Right. Right.
So,
I had written an essay a couple years ago about my little sister and I and what we did in the middle of the night when the adults passed out finally. And just this sense that like um we I don't know, we have these stories that we've just hidden so well, you know, um and I think that you realize as I was sharing this particular story about how we used to hide under the bed, which I'm sure you did, hide under the bed and all these things. And I remember thinking, as people would write to me after they read the essay and say, oh, I did that too. I did that too. I did that too. And I thought about all the other little kids, you know, who were also hiding when I was hiding, right? There was like this little army of kids all around the world. And we were all hiding in the dark and just waiting for the grown-ups to pass out so we could get up and we could make a sandwich or we could just have a minute, you know? And I think there's something that's just so beautiful and bonding in that when you realize that you did think your story was your own when you were growing up and you thought it was like nobody knew and it was unique. And now you realize, sadly, it's not unique at all. You know, it's not unique at all. And so the more we talk about it, the more you're like, oh, wow, you did that too. Okay. All right. So I am fine. This is actually what normal is. Maybe that isn't normal. Maybe all those other people, that isn't normal, but what we went through was pretty normal, you know?
at least normal for our circumstances.
Right.
That's
Or
for sure.
yeah. Not
Yeah.
normalizing it, but yeah. Well, I'm very proud of
Yeah.
you, Tara. Good
Oh,
job. Very
thank you.
proud of you.
I'm proud of you as well. So,
Thank
is
you.
there anything else you would like to express before we end the episode to those who may be listening, like a final thought?
Yeah. I just think how wonderful it is that people are even tuning into this because that means that, you know, your listeners and your viewers are breaking the silence and they are on the road to healing. So I think, you know, healing yourself and healing your children and breaking all those patterns, it's possible. And as you were saying, just the generational trauma, maybe it does end with us. And how great would that be? You know, I know my daughter is not going to be in an abusive relationship and she's not going to let anybody treat her like that. And she's not going to be an addict. And, you know, there's all these cycles that have been broken. So it is possible. And we could be the last ones, right?
Right.
After hundreds of years
Under
and lots
100
of
at
women.
least. Yeah, it ends here. That's been my goal. It ends here. This is where it ends.
Yeah.
My surviving daughter is not going to experience that, and my granddaughters are not going to experience that. And
Right.
hopefully anybody who's listening, they can get out and their future generations
Yeah.
don't experience it as well. Yeah.
Right. And what a legacy you're leaving. I mean, I think it's just a really cool thing. There was a quote the other day and somebody was saying like you know, all these people talking about, oh, our grandmas were so happy and we just want to go back to those days. And it's like your grandmas weren't happy, they just weren't talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
They were keeping secrets, you know.
We have to.
It,
Yes.
the world wasn't any better when your grandma was younger. She just didn't talk about it, you know. So
No, and that's the truth because that's so many. I like to tease my husband a little bit some because his family has a really great. He has great parents. He had a great childhood, a great experience, and when we first got married, he was like, "Oh, well, there was hardly no divorce or no, premarital children in our family. Everybody got like it was." He had in his head that it was just his family was very what we would call the normal, right? But
right,
his
right.
his mother gave us a Bible that's like 50 years old, family Bible, and all the generational stuff, marriages and births, they're all listed in there.
Right.
And I'm flipping through there and going, they got married, and 6 months later, here's this child. Ooh, here they got married, and 6 months later, oh, and here's several divorces, honey. And he's like, oh, I said, yes, it
Oh,
happened even back then. So
right.
I think people talk too much about, oh, this didn't happen back in the day, but no, it happened. It
Right.
happened back then too.
Right. We just glossed it over and
And
we didn't talk about it. Didn't
yes,
talk
but
about
they
it.
didn't talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So it was very eye-opening. He was like, okay. But yeah, and it's all just there, so I think people definitely you can figure, yes, your great grandparents had these experiences too. So
right, right,
yeah.
right. And we are fortunate to have organizations like yours, and we're fortunate to have resources. And I do, again, I just applaud anybody watching this and tuning in. You have almost 100,000 subscribers on this channel. So you're making a huge difference for the people who are watching and looking for um, just access to stories and avenues to tell their own truth and stuff. So thank you for doing what you do as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you for being here. We appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So, we're going to conclude this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. Please check out our website at www.breakthesilencedv.org. We have a Facebook page under the same name, all the social medias. Please follow our YouTube channel as well. And we now have a TikTok. So, that one, if you're looking for, is BTSADV7. A lot of our podcast episodes, clips from that, is find on TikTok. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. My name is Tara Woodlee, and I am the president of Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, an organization that gives survivors and their families, and the families that have lost loved ones to domestic violence, access to a community that understands the journey that they're facing. We hope this episode impacts you, and hopefully you want to learn more about the topic. If it is helping you in some way, let us know in the comments below. We love your feedback. Also, make sure to click the subscribe button below and the bell right next to it so that you can get notified the next time an episode premieres. We hope you will see us in the next episode, and thank you.